Some people say that without Brian Jones, there just would not be a Rolling Stones. He was the founder, he was the creative spark, the original leader. But his story, it ends with a mystery that has haunted rock and roll for over 50 years. It's a story of pure genius, betrayal, and a death that, to this day, we just can't fully explain.
And that's really the question at the heart of his legend, isn't it? He started one of the biggest bands in history. I mean, a global phenomenon that's still touring. So how did he go from being the leader, the guy in charge, to being kicked out of his own band and found dead? All before he even turned 28.
Just try to picture it. A beautiful English country estate, a warm summer night, but it all ends in tragedy. And this wasn't some quiet fading away. It was a sudden, shocking end that immediately started rumors. Was it just a classic case of rock star excess? Or was something way more sinister going on? To really get what happened, we've got to go back to the beginning. Yeah, before all the fame, the infighting, and the tragedy, Brian Jones was without a doubt the engine of the band. So let's rewind and see how it all started.
See, Brian wasn't just a member of the band. In the beginning, he pretty much was the band. He was a true musical genius who could pick up almost any instrument and create something magical. That sitar on Paint It Black, that's him. The marimba on Under My Thumb, that's him too. He was also a total rebel who hated authority, a spirit that would define the entire image of the Stones. He's the one who put an ad in the paper, he found the other members, and he even came up with the name. Legend has it he was on a frantic call with a club owner, glanced at a Muddy Waters album on the floor, and just blurted out the Rolling Stones. So make no mistake, in those early days, this was his band.
And right here, this is where the first cracks started to show. Once the final lineup was set with Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts, Jones made a move that created a resentment that would last for years. He declared himself the leader and decided that since he did the work to find gigs, he deserved more money than everyone else. It was a power play, and believe me, his bandmates would never ever forget it.
That initial friction? Well, it soon snowballed as outside forces and some serious internal drama started to pull control away from Jones, one piece at a time. And then came their manager, Andrew Loog Oldham. He saw the band as a brand, the rough, dangerous alternative to the clean-cut Beatles. This was actually really bad news for Brian. Oldham insisted that Jones, who had a young son, had to hide his girlfriend and his child to maintain that rebellious image. And for the sake of the brand, Jones agreed, sacrificing a huge piece of his own life. Then, in 1965, Brian met the model Anita Pallenberg, and his whole world changed. Their relationship was just this creative explosion. She pushed him to experiment with new sounds and instruments, and you can hear the results all over the Stones' mid-60s albums. But their connection was as destructive as it was creative, and it would pretty soon become the center of a devastating conflict. So, in 1967, Brian, Anita, and Keith Richards all take a trip to Morocco. But while they're there, Brian gets seriously ill and has to be hospitalized. Anita and Keith, they decided to travel on without him. And in that time alone together, well, everything changed. When Jones finally recovered and caught up with them, he saw it immediately. His jealousy completely took over, and it led to this violent confrontation where he reportedly hit Pallenberg. And that was it. That was the end. She left him on the spot and flew back to England with Keith. Brian was now at odds with his bandmate professionally and in the most painful way you can imagine, personally. Losing Anita to Keith sent Jones into a total tailspin. His drug and alcohol use went way up, he became completely unreliable, and his paranoia just grew and grew. And seeing how vulnerable he was, the rest of the band began to systematically push him out. Now, this wasn't a sudden firing. It was a deliberate strategy. They were afraid to kick him out directly, so the band began this heartless campaign to just erase him. They started minimizing his parts on records. During rehearsals, if his playing was off, sometimes they would just unplug his amplifier without even telling him. It was a slow, cruel, and total isolation. His decline just picked up speed. Legal troubles started mounting, making him a liability. At the filming of their famous rock and roll circus, he was reportedly in such bad shape he couldn't even tune his own guitar. Then came a second drug charge while he was already on probation, a huge risk for a band that was planning a major tour in the U.S. With that criminal record, it became pretty clear that getting a U.S. work visa was going to be nearly impossible. This was the opening the band had been waiting for. On June 8th, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Charlie Watts drove out to his home and delivered the news.
He was out of the band he had created. Which brings us right back to that night, just 1 month later. Brian was trying to put together a new band, but he never got the chance. So what really happened in that swimming pool? There are 3 main theories. Okay, so 3 main theories emerged. First, the official one, death by misadventure. Basically, he was drinking, he was taking pills, and he'd been warned not to go swimming. Second, a tragic medical emergency. Jones had severe asthma, and the pollen count was super high that day. He could have had an attack in the water. And then there's the darkest theory, murder. Years later, a contractor named Frank Thorogood, who was at the house that night, supposedly made a deathbed confession, admitting he killed Brian after an argument about money. He died the very next day, taking the truth with him. But Brian Jones's story didn't just end there. His death marked the beginning of one of the most haunting and tragic patterns in all of modern music history. At the time, his age was just a number. Yeah, a tragically young age, but just a number. That was all about to change. Yeah, this is a term that didn't even exist when Jones died. It was coined later, as a really disturbing coincidence started to feel more like some kind of curse. I mean, just look at the pattern that emerged. In the 2 years right after his death, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison all died at the exact same age. Suddenly, it wasn't just a number anymore. Brian Jones became the very first member of the infamous 27 Club, a sort of terrifying template for a rock and roll tragedy that has just kept repeating itself with heartbreaking frequency. And in the end, after all the history they had made together, this might be one of the saddest details of the entire story. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, the 2 men at the center of his professional and personal downfall, they weren't there to say goodbye. Years later, when an interviewer asked if he felt guilty, this was Mick Jagger's response. He admitted they were childish, sure, but he also put the blame squarely back on Brian. A chilling final word on a complex, tragic figure, a doomed genius whose life and death remain a brutal, unanswered question in the story of rock and roll.